I mean, I also think, I wonder to what extent, I mean, I suppose the whole series is called Challenges of Pandemics, but I kind of think large epidemics have the same issues as a pandemic. I mean,
or outbreaks or super spreading events. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
So I took your 6 challenges and I combined them into one, which was kind of like open, what do I call it? Open.
In the text below, open, transparent and trustable models to build public confidence in policy.
So I kind of thought that a lot of those things could be bundled up in that as like something that we want to, a high level goal that we want to achieve, and then we can break down how we achieve it. And a lot of the things we've been talking about in terms of, assessing models and fitting them and all that fit under that heading. And then I sort of came up with some other things which I kind of thought are generic problems that maybe they're too generic, but that we might want to be able to do better ahead of the next sort of big epidemic or pandemic. Maybe they're too generic, but
I'm just reading them.
So these are the ones that you've written. Sorry, I took a bit of time to do that, but we are now being recorded. Yeah. These are the ones that you've written underneath here, Glenn, are they?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know quite what I've missed. Would you like to take us through those and tell us how you've sort of come to put those down, presumably bringing together some of the other stuff?
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of thought that we need this sort of overarching challenge that's focused on either pandemic modelling or outbreak modelling, whatever we choose to define it in the introduction. And we kind of agreed while you're out that some of Ben Ashby's comments are more kind of scene setting or sort of would come into the introduction rather than being a challenge in themselves. So like what is the what's specific about pandemic modelling being one example. So I was kind of trying to think and based on the discussion we had last Friday, what we, the things that we said we would like to do. And I think, Ben Swallow had this suggestion of like, how do we make better use of kind of emerging sources of data, like phylogenetic data, but also I've listed a few others. I mean, these are just suggestions, but.
No, that's good.
And then, so that's one thing. How do we make better use of data that's available? Then we might want to think about how we use models and inference to sort of think about what sort of data we should be collecting, like as the outbreak starts to come in. So, I mean, again, this is quite difficult to do, I think, but we might really want to think more about what surveillance we would recommend being in place that would help us develop models and hopefully do something useful as well.
But there is one aspect, sorry to interrupt, about this data that we need. It's also the availability of this data to some kind of scientific community, because the organization has been different in different countries. Britain seems to have several groups more or less getting the data, but I'm not sure that everybody gets all the data. In Italy, instead, they kind of chose one group and had a kind of secret channel between that group and the government. And nobody else really knows the detailed data. They just get the public data. And I think that situation has shown up several times that maybe not all the useful data is available to all the community. And the question is that something desirable? Or does it just create 1,000 medRxiv papers that are difficult to go through?
Yeah, I would agree. Same issue in the UK.
Yeah, so just to say that there was a separate data meeting on Wednesday where exactly these discussions were had. So not to stop you from discussing them, but to save perhaps some doubling up of effort.
We need to know the sort of cross links, don't we? And decide where. I mean, I think it's fine that we simply put everything we think of and it may be that we've got very similar points in two places, and then decide where best to put it later. But I think we shouldn't leave stuff out now on the assumption that it might be somewhere else, because it might just disappear altogether. So I think that would be.
But it's important. I wanted to join the data meeting and I couldn't on Wednesday or Thursday. So maybe if something was sort of became as an important, Ben Swallow, then do tell us, not to have repetition, but to note it here as well.
What's a quick summary of the data meeting?
Yes, I think that I don't think the data meeting is. So when was it? Was it yesterday? I'm beginning to lose.
Yesterday or Wednesday, I've lost track.
Was it? I think was it Wednesday or yesterday?
I think it was Wednesday, if I remember.
Yeah, I don't know whether the recording is there yet, because I was asking Kira, and I gather that Arnold, who organises the recordings, is, it's half term and he's on holiday this week, so she thought it might not get there till Monday. So I haven't checked, but there is a recording and it should be available soon. But if Ben can sort of remind us of any relevant points that he remembers.
Yeah, certainly. So exactly what has just been said, we were talking about the data availability and making sure that that's being made available as quickly as possible to all the modelers who need it. And we talked extensively about contract tracing, app data in particular as one particular aspect that's been collected very well this time eventually, but that the people who perhaps need it don't have access to it. There's also the issue of privacy and all the difficulties that come in with that in sharing data that may already have been collected, but then if you want to repurpose it for another use, then it's difficult to get because you can't then use it for a different purpose that the participants haven't already agreed to. We talked a bit about the kind of idea of adaptive data. So the idea that, there might be existing frameworks that are already out there, but trying to kind of construct an experimental design that's relevant to COVID or a new disease is particularly difficult because often the people who collect the data are quite set in their ways, or, we want some sort of consistency over time with the different data sets. That it's difficult to convince them that changing a design setup will be beneficial. We talked about the data types that we want. So there were suggestions about more behavioral type data, sociological data about how people deal with risk. And that would be important for not just networking, but also in terms of any interventions, knowing how, or trying to get an understanding of how people respond to interventions, which would then link into how effective they might be. We talked a bit about who should be responsible for collecting that data, whether it should be driven by research councils, whether it's WHO responsibility, and also particularly in relation to the global status. So there may well be good data sets in the UK or more developed Western countries, but having the idea about how transmission occurs in, Vietnam or more remote areas where, some of those countries have done particularly well in controlling transmission, but we don't necessarily have a good idea about how how the virus spread in those sort of areas as well. So I think that was the main. I had to leave a bit early as well, so there may have been some further discussion after that.
I missed some of it. I think that's a really good summary, and you remembered far more of the points than I did. But I think we want to try and make these things as excuse me, as sort of non-country specific if we can. Some of the things will have to be specific to what's applicable in particular countries, but if we can try and make comments that go that work internationally, that would be good.
But that also means that if there will be a specific data chapter in this publication, then we could start with assuming that good and relevant data are available, then we find that the following models are useful.
Yeah.
So maybe we could leave it with a sentence like that and then go on which models we would like to do. would we like to model behavioral changes? Would we like to model things like new things? Would that be useful? And would we like to have better contact tracing models, etc.? How would these be?
All of the above, but we might want to suggest what data are needed to support those models at some point.
More in detail, you mean?
Well, if there are things that we don't think are available at all at the moment, I guess that should be collected, or you know, that certain sorts of data might be essential if we're going to try to.
I don't know. Have you, for instance, seen there was a recent paper somewhere about a comparison of almost all the countries in the world about what kind of interventions they had done and how that influenced the reduction of cases. And so they had collected this data. When did lockdown occur, or did they close school or not? And then they tried to attribute the effects of closing schools, etc., in a statistical way, comparing what happened in the different countries. And the same thing would be true, say, for contact tracing. If each contact traced person answered, had he been exposed to, and then a list of 50 possible risky places, then we could do logistic regression here and see what the contribution of each kind of place was to get infected. And that's something that is presumably not done because there's not such a long list and doctors don't have the time to do it. So they just ask usually, do you have people at home? Yes, let's contact them. So yes, one could perhaps even come up with some ideas, but then there's the problem of doing it in practice, collecting that kind of data. Long time ago, I was in this contact tracing business with other diseases, and the doctors just told me, we don't have time because we have to take care of the patients. We can't sit there for 2 hours to ask questions. Have you been at a bowling hall? And have you been in a restaurant lately? And how many times did you go to the restaurant during the past 2 weeks, etc.? But that could help a statistician to figure out attributable risk between different kind of places, and that would help interventions then. Should we close restaurants or not? Are they more important than gyms or something like that? Which is a practical question of intervention.
Yeah.
So yes, one could maybe say something about the kind of data we need, but I don't know if we can agree then for various kinds of models, which kind of data would be useful that have not been available now, most of them.
Yeah. I mean, I also wonder whether, going back to your comment, Valerie, about ensuring that, you know, the lessons learned are sort of like applicable globally, whether one of the organizing principles could be, you know, we could have a sort of data rich and a data sparse kind of component. So, you know, because you might do different, well, you would do different sorts of modeling, wouldn't you, if you had very little data, whereas if you've got an abundance of it, you might go for more complex models.
Mm-hmm. I also wondered if somewhere we wanted to say something about the role of data-free modeling, but
yeah, I think I mentioned that in one of my comments as well. But I agree.
I'm sure somebody did. I don't think but it seems to me that it does have a place, and
yeah, that's the best kind. That's the best kind of modeling.
Well, it's the only thing or kind of modeling I know is something about. So if it doesn't come in, my contribution will be basically zero, I think.
I think we need it and you, Peter. But certainly in terms of getting general sort of ideas and principles, I think it has a big role to play.
Yeah.
So I have a tendency to call these things qualitative and quantitative modeling in a way, because the data free tends to be qualitative in a sense that the stronger the infectivity, the more disease you'll see. That's a kind of qualitative assertion that probably comes up in all models and things like that, which is useful sometimes. I mean, when we find the influence of factors abstractly in a sense. And then, of course, there is the problem of measuring them. For instance, we have plenty of disease models that have a parameter which is susceptibility and infectivity. And we still probably don't have a measure for that in practice. But we know the theoretical effects of higher or lower infectivity or heterogeneity in infectivity or whatever. So there is a place certainly for things like that.
Yeah, also I think, you can, with sort of qualitative models, you can move beyond the current situation, whereas there's a danger of kind of like focusing too narrowly on where the current regime, if you're trying to fit models and are overly focused on sort of short-term prediction. So yeah, so in the 5 points that I've put, maybe that's another point somehow to understanding of the system is needed. A broader understanding of the system.
Where would one put that? Up at the beginning as the sort of 0.0?
Maybe, yeah. Yeah.
Before one gets on to thinking about data and.
Yeah, because most of the other points that I've written, I think, are really about data, aren't they, largely? Although to some extent it comes under sort of open, transparent models because that talks about multiple models and, testing predictions from multiple models.
Yeah. Well, it might also come a bit in the general introduction, I guess.
Yeah.
If one was sort of contrasting different types and roles of models, that could be part of the intro.
Yeah. So briefly, the kind of, so there's this point about using models to help us collect data. Then there's, which I still think is a key challenge, is how to characterize contact structures in society generally, and thinking about how interventions might change that. I guess that's the game we're in, and it's probably going to be the game you're in most pandemics. I put this point in under point 2, but maybe it goes under point 3, which is, can we actually think about running experiments, which we're doing effectively anyway by having different kind of lockdown regimes in different countries or different controls. But could you actually do that in a more systematic way to learn about what works and what doesn't work? And that seems to me to be would be a great place to be if you could do that. And then there's the question of integration of models into real-time decision making. So, can we actually make decisions based on models? Whether that's a good idea or not, I don't know. But I think at the moment we're kind of limited in our speed of response, it seems to me.
I think an important thing here is that, I am not convinced that we can, as a modeler, we can make exact decisions. We can give advice about potential outcomes, right? Because the uncertainty comes here. And I think we have to be careful about not overselling it. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. But at the same time, I guess, maybe this is a sort of theoretical point, but if you're making policy that's even loosely based on models and then changing the sort of trajectory of the outbreak and then collecting more data and adjusting your predictions, is there's some sort of feedback that's going on there, and I don't know if there are some issues there that might lead you to make bad decisions.
There is this problem of the delay of the measures that we're usually looking at. In trying to define a feedback loop. And of course, one of the challenges is to find as rapid proxies as possible of whatever we are interested in, because waiting for dead people takes about 3 weeks or something like that from interventions. And that's too much in a sense to to learn something useful, right? If you have to try something for 3 weeks before you see the effect.
Yeah.
So understanding good proxies for what we're most interested in that are quicker would be good, but we still haven't really found them yet. Maybe the rapid tests and the things like that are what we are looking for, but
yeah, I mean, so one thing I did think of under point 1 about making better use of new sources of data, which I guess that you could argue comes under that, is thinking about tests not being binary, but thinking about the properties of tests with respect to the sort of, and this relates to Mark Chaplin, I guess, and sort of thinking about internal dynamics, but you know, the antibody response when you, or the new, you know, the pathogen test in response to what, you know, you have an internal dynamic where, you know, when you're first infected, you don't have many viral particles, then they multiply. So something about the actual number in there, it tells you something about when you became infected. And so there's maybe more information that could be gained from diagnostic tests about when things happened, and that might give us a sort of sense, a better sense.
In older times, there were some papers written about this for AIDS or HIV, because people tried to guess when were people infected given their current immunity status and things like that. I don't know if it was ever practically used, but there were some papers written about that a long time ago, where they tried to do statistical analysis of what is the usual value of somebody, or if you have 2 measurements, even better, what's the usual decline between 2 tampons.
Yeah.
And this would be increase instead, what's the usual increase, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually tracking people over time as well is another thing that would be very useful, I think. But the more we can integrate data across across the timeline of an individual, I think the more we learn.
But I guess that's one of the data problems, that probably in some medical places they have such data, they have followed patients and they've done repeated analysis, but they're not in the public domain. They are somewhere with some doctors that maybe will have time to write a paper sometime. But
but there's also the challenge, I think, of integrating that sort of individual information into a sort of community level transmission model, which is, is quite challenging if you're dealing with millions of people, or even, hundreds of thousands of cases. It's difficult.
Yeah, so I can tell briefly the experience in SPI-M. There are many models that go into the kind of estimation of R or kind of mid-range projection, and each model is kind of free to fit whatever data they want, and then all the models get combined. There's a lot of discussion on some models using early indicators like test pillar 1 and pillar 2 tests, but then you have a problem that that data, you don't know how much you can rely on that data because people are tested when it's needed. It's not a surveillance system. So that skews things, but at least it's an earlier indication than hospitals. Hospitalizations are a bit delayed, but they tend to be pretty they tend to be pretty reliable, and I say that in like inverted commas, because hospital seeking behavior is something that it's kind of is not affected by how you observe, how you do things. It tends to be a bit more stable. But then, having said that, then counting who comes in hospital with COVID is always a bit complicated, because if somebody gets infected in hospital, you don't know when they arrived. If they come in hospital, they are tested, then you need to backtrace the date when they arrive in hospital once you obtain the test result. Some people get tested outside and they go to hospital because they have COVID. So even that is not very easy to define. And then you have hospital prevalence, ICU prevalence, and deaths. And different models try to do different things. And in fact, the results are never really are rarely in agreement with each other. So we just tend to combine them and try to put some intuitive consideration on how early some of the data that is fitted, that model is fitted to, comes before others. An early indication that one can use in the UK as well could be the ONS and the REACT study. These are 2 studies. They made stuff publicly available. The ONS is certainly kind of done very carefully. React is also done very carefully, but obviously they are more of a private thing, so they tend to have a bit of a headline grabbing sort of behavior.
But they're always saying that the ONS is only, it's always about a fortnight late, isn't it?
Yeah, it is because they try to kind of be extremely careful and not publishing anything that is like it needs to kind of go through GDPR, statistical disclosure control, and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, they want to kind of make things right. So and therefore they are a bit late anyway. Yes, I agree.
But you see that things are country dependent. In the first wave in Italy, which was up in the north, then at some point the hospitals were so overwhelmed that they admitted they had to do triage to see who they could admit, because the hospital was kind of full. And so the admission criteria were different for a certain period because of this overwhelming of the hospital system. And the Italian OMS tried to do a population study on seroprevalence, but they got, I think, 56% response or something like that. And so they have been criticized because nobody knows exactly how representative that was, and there is no law forcing people to give blood for testing and stuff like that. So all these things can have problems as well, and that goes into the data chapter, I guess.
Yeah, so that's the main problem, is that there is no unbiased data stream. That's a real killer here. There's no data stream that one can reliably consider. So you have to kind of try to integrate multiple data streams that often are in disagreement with each other to try to work out what's happening. And that's really kind of the main problem here. The other thing is that, as you said, that these delays for COVID are particularly nasty, because if you think that you can develop symptoms between 2 and 14 days, then that means, first of all, a very variable delay, and second, a potentially long delay. So even if you manage to kind of check when people test positive, then chances are they got infected, I don't know, possibly a week earlier. So you will never really catch up. You'll never be.
From the point of view of interventions, it doesn't matter very much if you miss 20%, because that would be enough to reduce R anyway. Yeah. But of course, from an estimating point of view, it's very bad if you have missed the 20 longest ones or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, the real killer during the first wave was that if you have a 2-week delay before your intervention and what is going to happen, and you have a doubling time of 3 days, then as soon as you start doing something, the numbers multiply by a factor of whatever, 16, before you actually see the effect of what you're doing, which is a killer, really. Now there are nothing is so extreme. I think the shortest doubling time of any measure that I've seen is what, 7 days or something. Maybe at times numbers might have gone up with a 5-day doubling time. I don't know, student populations in some halls of residence, but in general, everything is much less extreme than it was in March. So these delays are still there, but they don't really, like, their impact is the numbers might only grow unchecked by a factor of 4 rather than 16, which is kind of a huge difference. I also feel I hijacked the conversation. Maybe I'm completely off topic.
Well, I mean, we've got a slight issue with the data in general, in the sense that there's another section on data, and so there are companion discussions, and so obviously some of the points presumably need to be within the modelling section, and maybe other points need to be within the data. But I don't think you're off message, because I think at the moment we're just trying to collect everything somewhere, and we can worry about exactly where things are best expressed later. The main point is to capture all the points we want to make somewhere in the set of papers. But Nigel's joined us now, and Ben's left, so we've still got one of the active data. So I don't know whether you wanted to add anything from the data aspects vis-a-vis the discussions yesterday, Nigel.
well, I, some of the points that were being made, I thought were really interesting. I've only just joined you, so I don't know what you said before, but I do hope that somebody is indeed capturing these words of wisdom.
Yeah, we've lost the beginning, I'm afraid, because, well, never mind why, because you don't want my excuses. We've lost the beginning anyway through my incompetence, but we are recording it now. Are you aware of what we're looking at, Nigel? Because there's a document that we're looking at.
Is that the one that's on?
So it's in the Dropbox.
Oh, it's in Dropbox, right?
Yeah. So you need to look in the IDP Dropbox.
Chapter 6 modeling.
So it's in challenges, isn't it? And then in chapter 6 modeling, and the latest document.
Did anybody mind posting the link into the chat, because I don't actually have easy access to the Dropbox.
Okay.
I wonder what happens if you post a document in the chat.
Not sure. We could try it and see.
Yes, you should be able to post a link to it.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't want to.
No, but you need to be able to see it, Nigel, because the discussions aren't going to make a lot of sense, or at least they'll make better sense with it than without it.
I have now got a.
Is it this one?
Dropbox.
I have now something from Dropbox.
No, well, I don't know. Is it? Oh, it might. Well, which version is that? Because unfortunately there are lots of versions. And somebody, Lisa, I think, was making a very sensible suggestion that we got rid of some of the old ones and put them in.
No, I think it's a very old version. Yeah, apologies.
Yes, the section 6 of this version is blank.
Let's see what happens.
No, that's a very early one.
No, I've just put the latest file in the chat. Check if you can read that.
Right, I'm trying. Yep,
And the specific bit that we're looking at is towards the end of page 3, I think, and the beginning of page 4. Is that right? Yeah.
Pages aren't actually numbered.
No, they're not
numbered. But you can see it from the.
So, what's the heading? General modelling considerations.
Yeah, there's specific challenges, and below application orientated challenges.
Right. Okay.
The version I'm looking at, it's green, but I think we've decided that not everybody sees the same colours. So.
No, it's green on mine too. Application oriented challenge.
Yeah. So it starts.
Very philosophical question.
So starting with application oriented challenges, there's a set of 5 points that Glenn has put in, trying to bring together some of the points that were earlier on, I think, and make a nice coherent strategy. Thing I don't think we've got particularly there is the whole question of model development. I mean, one of the things one would, but perhaps it comes under a lot of these, you know, one of the things that you would be thinking of in terms of work that needs to be done for the future might be to develop models to deal with particular challenges. I mean, to some extent that comes in because you've got characterization of contact structures, and you've got somewhere contact tracing and so on, and so I suppose one would want to have model development to incorporate or to allow of or something, but perhaps that's a sort of area, because the ones we've got at the moment are quite well, as you say at the top, they're application oriented, but there might be some things that we might want to put in that were more towards the theoretical development and even towards these data-free models that we mentioned.
Yeah, no, I do think it's worth thinking about where we put sort of data-free or sort of low data models. I mean, I kind of said at the beginning there as well that I think it's all about, in a way, it's all about preparedness. So it's kind of like, what do we want to put in place?
Exactly.
So that, yeah.
But I think we should have different theoretical structures, and within the theoretical structures, we can have a no data model will be one of them. Branching processes would be another. ODE style compartmental models would be another. ABMs, and then we have one which are layered with networks or with feeding from the phylogenetics data. I think we need that somewhere on a structure. I don't model structure or a framework, technical framework structure, something like that.
Yeah, because in the current document, Nick, that comes after challenges. So then I think the next bit actually talks about
what to model. I know, but I think if we're doing it in this setup, which is we will expand these 5 points, then maybe we need to have that as a point.
Yeah. I think, yes, I guess I can envisage one might have some of that at the beginning in the general introduction. To what extent one wants to talk about all the different sorts of models is, I suppose, the extent to which there are challenges in them. You know, if you're going to sort of separate out all those different sort of subsections, are there challenges separately in different sorts of models? Are there some challenges that are common across all models, like contact tracing or something? You know, I mean, it might be that the challenge is to model contact tracing or the effect of, or it might be another intervention, but and then it might be, so what you want to say, the approach might be to start from what you want to do and then think to what extent current models can actually allow you to do that, or where the developments are needed, rather than thinking from the models first. Mm-hmm. But I don't know.
I think you're right. I think that way we identify the gap that needs to be filled with future modeling. So maybe we need a point about I don't know, something that alludes towards the modeling, either intervention or structure that needs to be ready.
I mean, I'm sure that's right. I'm not sure what the best way is to do it, and perhaps we need to think about that. But I'm sure we do need something from that, you know, from the models per se end of things.
But in a way, I thought that was the whole point of this paper is to sort of like say what we do need to sort of develop.
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, we're not trying to just write an account of what's happening at the moment, but really try to take that as read and move forward if we can.
Yeah.
And maybe sort of challenge, there are the massive amount of challenges around vaccination, because we don't know what a vaccination would do, and we don't know whether people will take the vaccine, you know, from simple points of that. But that's not a separate challenge. I think that is a behavioral concept which is mentioned, I believe, somewhere.
So it doesn't have to do that.
I don't know where, but I thought it was mentioned somewhere. Glenn, it is mentioned somewhere, no?
Not sure.
Yeah,
sorry, Peter. What?
I don't. Is that a modeling thing? Like you don't know how people behave? Yeah, that's true.
But it's something you can test with the model and explore, I guess, in absence of anything else. So that's kind of what people are doing, sitting with their vaccine models, waiting for the vaccine that will be.
I mean, maybe there needs to be something about a challenge about how you model the different sorts of interventions. So, you know, one could be vaccination, one could be
contact tracing.
Contact tracing, one could be kind of lockdown. And, you know, I think that is quite a challenge, because I certainly, you know, like even just modeling something like vaccination, as you say, there's so many different options. I mean, it's not necessarily, I kind of agree with Peter that it might not be that conceptually difficult, but in practice, it seems really hard to do.
Well, I think that modeling contact tracing is a conceptual difficult thing.
Yeah.
And the same holds for actually social distancing or lockdown, because you actually go from it might be, and there are some data which suggest, I think, that you go to different classes of models in the lockdown, from models which are pretty much can be approximated by browsing processes, to models where you need to go to diffusion and so it's conceptually very different and also difficult, I think.
So the conclusion, I guess, the sort of like outputs of this then would be, if we identify these kind of practical problems that we want to solve, you know, some of them are very much going down the data and estimation route. You know, how do you estimate how effective a vaccine is, you know, in reality, as opposed to even in sort of challenge studies. And then some of them would be, well, actually, we don't even have the modeling tools to represent this properly, and we really need to think more. And so that, to me, that's a really powerful outcome, because, you know, then you can use that to build the, you know, new research programs.
Yeah, well, that's right. I think that's really important. We can get that.
I mean, we could maybe, sorry, I'm just pushing this a little bit towards, then maybe we could also link here with phylogenetic data, because I don't remember, in one of these conversations we discussed this, and it is a practice to model in HIV, so linking virulence to transmission and potentially to asymptomatic transmission. Does it sit here, or does it sit within what is already there that we pen out?
I was trying to remember, Justine. I know we've had these discussions, but I think it was here, wasn't it? The sort of within and between host modelings and linking between hosts and with. So I think I mean, they're obviously relevant in other sections too, and similarly the vaccination and the whole comes with economics and all those sorts of areas. So all these topics are going to appear more than once, but I think we ought to be talking about that here.
So does that go within this part where is interventions and other things like linking it, or do we have a special part? So if interventions is 6, then a 7, which is the challenging of linking, let's say, within host and between host modeling, and within that we put the phylogenetic and is it Peter? Was it Peter that was mentioning the modeling from that side?
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that makes sense to have them as specific, and then we expand, or have them already somewhere? I think
I suppose from the logic of what I've written is that, you know, multi-scale modeling, I guess, is a kind of technical problem that we might want to come out of this as being a challenge. But in terms of these, it's not a practical challenge in the sense of it's not something that we want. It's not a societal challenge, I guess, but maybe not all of these are anyway.
But multi-scale would also, multi-scale would include spatial component, which is different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry,
okay. Yeah, it's an example, I guess, of multi-scale modeling,
but if we're talking about you know, different sorts of models being appropriate to answer different sorts of questions, and starting with the data free and continuing, and the challenges for modeling, you know, future challenges, future things we need to be able to do. it could go in with that sort of area, that we need to be able to bring together between and within host models.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent that it falls, I tried to sort of cover it, but maybe not very explicitly, under making better use of new data sources, because, but maybe it goes beyond that, maybe. I think it's probably worth putting in there, and I think we'll have to rearrange these things anyway, but I think it's worth putting down, definitely.
And if you feel that the stuff that is at the beginning at the moment is it's not needed there, please let's remove some so that we have less to less pieces of a puzzle, shall we say, to put together.
Yeah.
Well, I agree. When I did that first editing of this, when we did that rearrangement, I didn't cut anything out, simply because I didn't want to remove anything that anybody felt they wanted to keep. But I think I sort of suggested where I thought it probably started. And then we've got a lot of general comments, and I think that part needs to be condensed down, doesn't it, to an introduction, which makes some of the points there, and some of the points we probably can throw away for the point of view of this paper.
Not only, but I also believe that some are repeated effectively.
Well, I'm sure that's true too.
Yeah.
So that part, so that there's a challenge for us to write a proper introduction, and to some extent it's hard to write the introduction till you know what you're introducing, but we could try and rewrite that part, and then it's a question of taking this list. I think it's a really good starting point, this list of glens where we've got these 5, and adding to that the things that we've been discussing today, which might make the list up to sort of 6 or 7, maybe 8.
Yeah, so 6 interventions, is that right? And then 7 kind of models and different structures, or is that the summary of what we were talking about?
I'm not sure. I mean, yes, certainly those are 2 of the points, exactly how best we combine. To be honest, I haven't read, because I'd only just seen this when we started talking, and I haven't really properly digested the structure that Glenn's already got here. I mean, I've got the structure in terms of the bold bits, but there's a lot of detail there, which I really need to.
Yeah, and I think some of those some of the sub bullets might be better switched around. And
so,
I mean, I was kind of thinking a useful way of thinking about this is to try and have these headings about what we want models to be able to do in society. So in other words, from a layperson's point of view, what's the benefit of this, rather than it being, I mean, this is a choice. We could write it for modelers and have these challenges being challenges that modelers would recognize, or we could write them in terms of how does modeling help us deal with pandemics better, and then build the challenges and then draw out the challenges in terms of what that means for modelers later on in the paper. Which I think is the latter is what I was trying to achieve here, although I may not have achieved it cleanly.
I think the only problem with that approach is trying to get in the bit that we were discussing about sort of models for their own sake more, and the developments we need for the future, without specifically thinking about it in terms of a challenge, an applied.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, that's something about thinking outside the box, excuse the phrase, but you know, it's about not being so narrowly focused on the current incoming stream of data and actually thinking, how does this system work? So I think there probably is a way we could phrase it that would fit that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the sort of approach that, because I'm not a sort of data analyst at all, is always to think about the underlying process, and that the physical process that you're trying to understand, and that's always for me the starting point rather than the data. But that approach tends to lead you to think about model structures of sort of gradually increasing complexity. What can you do with the simplest model, and what else do you need to add, and so on. Now, I'm not suggesting we do it that way, but maybe we could have one challenge that somehow brings out that sort of progression that would give you more of the challenges for modelers.
Yeah. I mean, in my mind, it's something. I mean, it's also something to do about how much do you trust the model? It's kind of, or not the model. How much do you trust modeling outputs? Because if you have a very as modelers we know, if you've got a very complex model, it can fit the data nicely, but doesn't necessarily lead to much understanding. Whereas a nice simple model can really illustrate what on earth is going on, and sort of so you can see the wood for the trees.
Well, we certainly need to get that in somewhere.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what the best.
I'm not either.
Another dimension to that, which doesn't seem to be here at all, which is about co-design, co-production, getting people who are interested in the model involved in the model designing. I have this nice story. I produced a model of the English housing market, and I took it along to what was then DCLG, now is MHCLG, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government.
Local government, yeah.
Said, look at my wonderful model. It'll allow you to predict housing shortages and housing prices. And they said, well, we already know how to do this. We have an Excel spreadsheet. And mine was a agent-based model, some sophistication. So I said, well, yeah, well, I think my model it has more sort of kind of mechanisms built into it. And they said, well, does it produce does it give us different predictions from our spreadsheet? And I said, well, yeah, probably not. And they said, well, why should we be interested in your model then? And I said, well, what happens if it didn't produce the same answers as your spreadsheet? And they said, well, obviously, then your model would be wrong. And I call the modeller's catch-22. If it's right, it's useless, and if it's wrong, it's wrong. And the moral of the story, to my mind, is that it's no good going along to policymakers with a model that you developed independently, and no matter how wonderful it is, because you get the modelers catch-22. What you have to do is you have to get them involved right at the beginning in the design of the model, so that they own the model as much as you do.
But that has never been the case with epidemic modeling, I guess. Or maybe at the time of WHO and the Bailey and stuff like that, that there was somebody who commissioned modeling in a way.
Maybe that is a challenge, though. I mean, to some extent, I think that is covered. So that could be covered under the point 5, the open, transparent, trustable models. I haven't actually put that in there, and I didn't think of that. So I think that's a really good point. But it's about the people that need to trust the model trusting it, and I guess that goes all the way from the public to the people who are actually determining the policy, or possibly the other way around.
And I completely agree. And I think I think I can give you an example where we built the model with the World Bank, and until they fully didn't involve themselves into understanding how to actually write the equations, they were not interested. And then they were very interested once they understood how it works. And it's to this day being used as a sort of allocation of resources across LMICs for HIV. Very, very good point.
Yes, but at the same time, we have another catch. I don't know if it's 22 or some other number, but from a scientific point of view, the main distrusters of our models are ourselves. because we want to develop them and improve them all the time. And we realize that they must be wrong in some sense because they are simplifications and maybe we could make them better. So trustable by whom is a probably very interesting question, as has been mentioned before by Nigel as well.
Yeah,
because we don't really trust our models.
I have a story of that as well. I mean, the LSTHM model, which everybody uses, we've done a replication of that, and we found there is actually a bug in it, and we took that to we told them about that, and they said, yes, actually we know that there was a bug in it. So you know, I think that's also important, and my suggestion there is that perhaps we should put it's also on code quality. I think is that there ought to be opportunities for replication of models, but independent people ought to be rebuilding models in the same way as you have a replication in scientific experiments.
And maybe it's we should make it into a more optimistic point and say that rather than kind of criticize, we should say that involvement of policy decision makers is from the onset of developing and understanding the model is the key. Yeah. So we're not saying they're not listening, but we're saying we just have to have them involved from the onset, and then maybe they will listen more.
Yes. Yes, I'm sorry, I've slightly confused the issue. I think there's 2 points here. First of all, I think that the clients, as it were, should be involved in the development of the model. And secondly, that models there should be a strong motivation, incentive, I should say, for models to be replicated. These are 2 quite separate points, but
I think the second point is already there. The first is not. I think
that's right.
But if you, at least in the UK, look at the history now of the COVID pandemic, did anything of this happen? I mean, the most influential and first model was the Imperial College model, right? That came out quite early and at least influenced those for a while. But that was not commissioned or done in, at least as far as I know. I don't really know the real story about that model. Or if Neil just constructed it by himself quicker than everybody else, taking an old model and putting some new numbers in it or whatever happened. But that was not an example, as far as I know, of a collaboration with the government or something like that. That came later or in parallel with this group that you have, the various scientist groups.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that model's been around. Basic model's been around for, I don't know, 6-8 years. It's an earlier flu model, which sort of dusted off and redeveloped.
And later on, the SPI-M group and whatever was kind of built, and then people started comparing models and asking whether these could be averaged in some way or whatever to give advice. So it's quite ideal. I agree. The consultancy work I've been doing has always been better if you're there from the start. I think Fisher already said that very often statisticians arrive so late that you can only kind of see that the study is already dead or something like that. I think that was Fisher who mentioned that we are called in late and said, do you have a model and can you predict something? And then it's kind of too late to really do something about the decision-making process.
But isn't it the case that basically everywhere at the moment policymakers just, not just do something and then see whether it's enough or not?
Yes, but also because we don't have very much to say about whether it's more important to close down restaurants than theaters.
No,
That's the debate in Italy right now. I mean, is it good to close down theaters but not churches? That has been debated now for a week. And really, should restaurant close at 6 o'clock in the evening? Is that very important? Or could they have had also dinner? Because that has been prohibited in Italy now. They must close at 6 o'clock. Nobody knows where these things come from. Of course, the government says everything is good for diminishing the spread. But these priorities, yes, they have just been imagined, I guess, by politicians or discussing with some experts. I don't know. Nobody knows right now in the public in Italy. So the problem between modelers and policymakers is a complicated thing. And I don't know how much we can say about that link, because it's of course idealized that we do models and they closely look at them and then decide based on that, because they also have other worries, right? From economy to who is going to elect them next time and whatever are political worries that will be integrated with whatever we say.
Valerie, is actually the link with policy another one of the challenges, or is linking with policy another one of the challenges?
Well, there is a policy and politics sort of section. So yes, but again, it's like all these things. You know, maybe one wants to say something here.
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of model development, I was sort of thinking of the sorts of things that I've done in the past, and usually I suppose a lot of it has been with physical processes that are fairly well understood in some sense. You know, if we're talking about climate or hydrology or whatever, there's a lot about that, and so it's normally sort of later on when you start involving the applied people. But I think it's useful to have a sort of what I always think of as a library of models that you understand, and that could be for epidemics, it could be for all sorts of things, but you know, with basic structures and things that components that you think you're likely to want. I mean, models can be tweaked and things can be added and subtracted and so on, but I think there's a role for modelers in developing models without a very detailed application in mind, just a broad application, because these can be done without knowing exactly what they're going to be applied to, and whether it's going to be flu or COVID or, you know, some nasty neglected tropical disease or whatever.
Sometimes it is a bit it's a bit specific. Like the first models I was thinking about was when foot and mouth disease was going on, and then the question was, should wrinkling go from inside out or outside in? And that's probably not as relevant for human diseases.
Let's hope not. Anyway.
Well, that's what social distancing is, isn't it?
Yeah, but that you can do all at the same time, probably not.
I'm afraid I have to go, actually. I've just realized.
Okay, so do you have to go absolutely this minute? Or
no, I can hold on for a couple of minutes if we want to decide.
So let's try and make a decision as to where we go from here. We can't all work on this document at once because it gets in a mess. Glenn, would you like to have a go at adding the extra bits in that we've been, because I'm
happy to do that.
Yeah. Notes, so that's right. Numbering you with that bit, and that would as a first go at that, and then people can add anything else that you've forgotten on that. Would somebody else, maybe don't know, Gianpaolo, Peter, maybe me, have a go at this early introduction bit and trying to sort of say something about modelling in general and provide, would that be a make sense of what we've got there and get rid of what we don't need. Would that be
okay? We can try at least to put down, but let's then leave this document as it is.
Yes, I agree.
We write a new document where we propose an introduction.
Yes,
I think that's easier because
I think so. And then we don't adapt this one
we
any
can
further.
take pieces from this one, of course, but
yeah,
I think that's a good idea. And then so if people work on different things, and then we can sort of sandwich them together. And people might also look at whether there's anything after the end of Glenn's green bit. We've got.
Well, there are some pieces who are introduction. There are some pieces who are other
There's
things.
quite a lot beyond that. So we need to go through somehow between us and fish out the bits from all that need to be taken back and put into earlier sections, aren't there? I don't know how best to suggest we address that.
I suggest somebody who has an overarching view, so maybe Valerie, of everything. I don't know, I'm just pointing out, because you have an overarching view of how you see this slotting in to take parts from this and then maybe make a point that this needs expansion and then we can expand on it, or this needs cutting, or you know, well, actually only parts that need expansion. So somebody, I think it makes sense, somebody with an overarching view of what we kind of.
I'm happy to try and do that. I think it would be useful if people doing the earlier parts could extract anything that they think ought to be. If we imagine for a minute that it's stopping at the end of Glenn's green points, once it's got the extra parts in, then what have we got below that needs to be taken back and inserted?
Yes, some of the things are clearly introduction.
They are,
yes. And other things are details coming later on how to look at models.
Exactly. So I think we want to leave them there, but just fish out from there the points that we feel need to be made, and then see if there's anything.
So do you mean in a separate section, or sort of in a section that is main text, or within the components of Glenn's structure?
I'm hoping that those points will be possible to, when Glenn's structure is expanded, that they'll be able to be incorporated into there. But maybe that won't work. I mean, I haven't been able to sort of get a feel for how it.
No, but for instance, I'm looking at the section called correctness of model predictions that is somewhere below. And that, of course, has to do with Glenn's question, what are trustable models somewhere?
Yeah.
Right, so there's trustable section, so that comes into discussion, what is trustable and what should be looked at.
Yeah, so maybe once we've got this list, we can also expand those sections a bit. I mean, by taking those bits back and sort of pasting them into
I think that makes sense. That's a good plan. So there's two things to be done, looks like: an introduction and these points and expansion of them. Maybe we should split into two groups and do that.
I think that would be a good idea. Why don't we wait until Glenn has extended the list in the way that we've discussed? And then
Peter and I try to say things about general things about modeling,
and then we can divide it up and take bits and try and work on between us.
Yes, because there will mostly be things to hang on to Ben's structure.
Exactly. And I think so.
It'd
be really good to get that structure first. We need to let Ben go because he needs to get away.
I think it's Glenn.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. It's easy to get confused with Ben and Glenn.
I thought I said Glenn, but maybe I didn't. But anyway.
Okay, and are we going to arrange? Are we going to try and meet?
We have a meeting next Friday.
We have penciled in because Kira was doing the timetable for the bulletin. So we penciled in one for next Friday. I don't know whether that works for everybody, but we put it in the timetable because we've been tending to have one a week. So we just put in one in for next Friday.
And that's good. And is that this time slot or in the morning?
I forget.
It's in the PDF that was sent this morning, isn't it? From yesterday.
I'm just logging.
Yeah.
It's the morning coffee slot.
I think it might be the morning.
Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect for me at least.
Coffee slot in the morning, 10 o'clock.
Yeah. Great.
Is that okay for everybody?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
nearly
10
everybody?
o'clock your time.
Excellent. Yes. That's good.
Great. I'm looking forward to it. I quite like these chats now. It sort of frames my days.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Yes, indeed.
And-
Thank you.
Can I still
bye,
ask
Glenn.
Bye.
something
Yep, Peter.
completely unrelated? And that is about yesterday. I cannot read an agenda, so I thought that the meeting or the discussion yesterday led by Deirdre was today.
Oh, okay.
So I missed that. I was planning to be there.
Oh, that's a shame.
Were there many people? Or? And
Well, it was interesting, actually.
Yes. Are you going to say it, Valerie, or me?
Well, it was interesting because until Dennis was late for various reasons, and until Dennis joined us for the first 20 minutes, half an hour, it was an all-female audience, which is really unusual. So, I mean, given that there were about 8 of us or so it wasn't that there were 3. And there were several babies on the line as well. So that was quite nice. Anyway, it will have been recorded. But again, I suspect that it won't go up until Monday, probably.
okay, I will probably have a look at that.
Yeah, in fact, I need to listen to it too. There's the odd document. I'm not sure where they've been put.
There was put on something
Nigel's
else.
gone, but he did one for his. So I think Nigel used Mural. So they, the other one they used, what was it called?
It was J something, but I couldn't open it.
Oh, well, I did open it, but I'll have to, if I can find it, I'll send it to you, Peter.
Okay,
Please,
that's
thank you.
great.
And this Mural thing as well. Those are apps, and then my phone is forcing me to download them as apps before I can do anything.
I didn't have any problem opening them, but of course I'm not opening them on a desktop, not a phone.
Yes.
And I just clicked the links and they came. I didn't have to download any software. But I'll try and find those and send them to Peter and anybody else that wants them. Or I'll try and put them if I can, I'll put the links in the chat on the Slack channel.
Okay, that's great. It looked like one of the things where I thought I might have ideas which contribute something.
Yeah, no, that would be good. Right. Is there anything? I'll tell you what I watched. If we're on, I could stop recording now. Hang on a minute. Remember how to do that. Stop recording. Done it. Has it stopped? Seems to be still.
Seems still to be recording.
It's blinking, but
It is. Why is it? Doesn't want to let me stop it, does it? I could.